All right, now we've laid out the basic pro-legalize argument and the basic against legalization argument. The next step is to start to compare the strengths and weaknesses of the two arguments. And given that each argument has a number of steps and parties involved, it's worth focusing our attention on the parts of the arguments pro and con that are in direct opposition to each other. So one way to do that, it's one of the reasons why I think flowcharts are helpful here, is in isolating various cells within the overall argument, is just to focus on one aspect of the argument and compare what the two sides are saying on that side of the argument. So this side over here, for example, is saying that the most important thing with respect to cancer patients is that we treat them as self-responsible adults. That is directly contradicted by the argument, or rather the position that's being advocated over here, that says that we cannot treat cancer patients as fully self-responsible adults because they have diminished capacity. And so when we are doing our own thinking about the relative merits of the arguments here, one thing to do is just to pause, block everything else out, and just ask, who do I think has the better in making a judgment about the proper moral status of cancer patients? Do I think that we should treat them as self-responsible adults, or do I think that we should treat them as adults, but adults with diminished capacity, and so forth? Now, what are our considerations going to be? Well, one side over here is going to say, look, life is not guaranteed, right? And particularly life in a free society, right, brings risks with it. And the fact that in some cases the risks are very high doesn't change the fact that I still am a self-responsible adult and I should be left free to make my own decisions here. And this side is then going to respond by saying, well, that's all very fine and good, but isn't it appropriately benevolent to make an exception here? If we are pretty sure that some adult is going to make a really bad decision, and that decision is going to have catastrophic effects with respect to his or her life, isn't it appropriate to override that person's self-responsibility for that good purpose and so forth? All right, so that's another way of stating the initial opposition here. Now, this side then might respond to that argument by saying, no, it's not proper to override in those cases, because part of being rather a self-responsible adult is to recognize cases where you are in situations of diminished capacity. Certainly, in many medical issues here, what you guys are pointing out is true. Most of us don't have medical degrees or PhDs in physiology and biochemistry and so forth. Yes, I recognize that when a health issue comes up, I can become very emotionally overwrought, and that can interfere with my decision making. But what will a self-responsible person do when he or she recognizes that that is the circumstance? Well, what you do as a self-responsible adult is you seek expert advice. And so if I don't have the expertise with respect to medical circumstances, then I should consult a physician. And that should be my responsibility to do so. If I think that I might be making emotionally skewed decision, then that's also one of the benefits of going to a physician, because a physician has a cooler head, has objectivity, and can give me his or her judgment of the facts right pretty straight. So we don't need to override people's self-responsibility, right, for these facts, right? Instead, what we need to do is treat people as self-responsible adults who will go and seek physicians and get the expert objective advice that they need, so they can then still make the decisions they need with respect to their own lives. Now, this side of the argument, of course, then might respond and say, yeah, well, physicians aren't perfect, and so how can we rely on physicians who've got a lot to keep up with? They're not necessarily going to be up to speed on all of the various cutting-edge pharmaceuticals, right, who are coming out. And so maybe we need people who are even more experts, given the complexity of the medical field, than the average physician to make decisions on particular products and so forth. This side can also argue, well, in a free market society also, we're expecting these people to go and consult physicians, but physicians are visited fairly regularly by drug reps from the pharmaceutical companies, and they can be bribed in various hard and soft ways, and that might skew the physician's objectivity, and so then the cancer patient can't necessarily trust the judgment of the physician. And then, of course, this side will then respond to those things and say, well, look, if you have any doubts about the objectivity of your physician, then that's an argument for getting another physician. Or if the stakes really are high, don't trust simply one physician, get a second opinion and go to a second or a third physician so you can put yourself in a position of being able to trust the objectivity of the physicians. Okay, so that gets bounced back and forth, pro and con with respect to the cancer patients. Think about it, make your own judgment about whether this side has the better of the argument in saying that in the final analysis we should treat them as self-responsible adults, or whether this side has the better of the argument and says we should treat them as adults with diminished capacity. All right, then move on to the next cell in the argument. This side here says the proper way to think about Laetrile manufacturers is that in a free society, they have a profit motive, and that the profit motive is a morally healthy motive. They have gone into the pharmaceuticals, and we should trust their motivations, right, for doing so, and that they have certain rights that they can stand on, right? Absent violations of rights, they should have their own rights to liberty and property protected. This side over here says that we disagree with the moral and legal status that you guys are arguing for Laetrile manufacturers. We don't think the profit motive is healthy in this particular case. It may be a generalized animosity against pharmaceutical industry or this particular pharmaceutical company in particular. We think it's really only motivated by money in an unseemly way. We think that their claims to actually caring about the health of cancer patients is just public relations, marketing, and we think that really they know in their heart of hearts that they're dealing with a product that doesn't do anything, and so that means that they are just predators or potential predators looking for an opportunity to take advantage of various people. Now, a certain amount of this involves attitudes toward the profit motive in general and trying to read the motives of other people. But then, again, think about those two cells. What, in your judgment, is the best way to think about the moral status of the Laetrile manufacturers? Moving on to the next cell here, we have a claim here that the free market is based on voluntary trade and leads to win-win results. This side disbelieves that claim, believes that the free market leads to lose-win results and is a place where there's a great deal of predation, right, that occurs. Now, this is in part a generalized argument. One side of the argument typically has a benevolent view of the free market, seeing it in these terms, and then is more predisposed in this particular case to give the free market the benefit of the doubt and say probably, right, in this case, this is the result. Sometimes the argument against is from a generalized opposition to the free market, believing that in general the free market is driven by predation, and that can lead, in this particular case, to a suspicion that we are going to end up with predatory lose-win results and so forth. Now, that general issue certainly comes to bear on this particular case, but we can also say in this particular case, absent what our general predilections might be, do we think transactions involving Laetrile are best characterized by voluntary win-win results, or do we believe in this particular case that transactions involving Laetrile are in fact predatory? Make a judgment and make your decision which side that you are on. Again, over here, we have one other general issue about the proper role of government. This side, right, comes to the table with a belief in general that the proper use of government power is characterized by the protection of individual rights and limited to that purpose. This side is bringing to the table a generalized principle that the government should be interventionist in the economy for various reasons, and in this particular case, for paternalistic reasons. And so we think about whether we are paternalistic, right, or non-paternalistic in our general theory of government. And then how we decide on those four cells, these final conclusions, whether it should be legalized or not legalized, follow as a direct consequence. All right, I want to put on the table three more subsidiary issues, or issues that are definitely folded into the case and may deserve a certain amount of highlighting as one thinks through and makes a decision about which side one is eventually on. One of those subsidiary issues has to do with risk assessment. And one of the interesting things about this case is that part of the decision-making involves an assessment of risk, given that we have a newish pharmaceutical product and the data might be suggestive one way or the other, but is not conclusive. And then also the consequences one way or the other are pretty high. And one of the issues is that the anti-Laetrile position is incentivized in a way to be more risk averse, whereas the pro-Laetrile position is more incentivized to be more risk tolerant. So if we think, for example, of the cancer patient's perspective, and they're saying we should be able to make the decision in this case, it's our moral right, it should be our political right, but what psychologically is factoring into their assertion of those rights claims? And we say from the cancer patient's perspective, they say, well, look, either Laetrile works or it doesn't. Right? Maybe I don't know for sure one way or the other. But also Laetrile is either going to be legal or it's going to be illegal. And I'm not necessarily the one who's going to be making that decision either. So that is to say we've got two issues, each of which has two possibilities, and that grid that we can set up tells us something about how the cancer patients are going to assess the risk in those cases. So suppose we start a little table here. We say maybe it's the case that Laetrile works, and maybe it's the case that Laetrile, right, does not work. Okay. Right. But then also, it's going to be the case that Laetrile might be, right, made legal, and it might be the case that Laetrile is made illegal. Now let's figure out then the results of each of these cases. If Laetrile works and it's made legal, right, then I might live. If it turns out that Laetrile works but it's made illegal, then the most likely result is I'm just going to die of cancer. If Laetrile does not work and it's legal, well, it's not going to effectively help me, so I'm just going to die. And if Laetrile does not work and it is made illegal, then I don't get to use it, it has no effect anyway, so I'm going to die. All right, so I fill in the options here, and then we point out one of these cells is not like the other. One of these cells is not the same. And what's going to stand out in the cancer patient's thinking is this cell right here. There's one of the four possibilities that gives me the possibility of staying alive, right? All of the others lead to death. And so that is the cell that the cancer patients are most going to focus on and urge and put. That's going to loom largest in their decision making. And that then is to say, yeah, there are all kinds of risks and so costs associated with the use of Laetrile, but those are going to be extremely diminished in the cancer patient's thinking. And so they're going to say, hey, what do I have to lose? Let's take the chance, let's take the risk. And so what we have here is a very risk tolerant, right, position. Now, on the other side of the risk assessment case, the FDA is asserting a paternalistic role, but if we get inside the FDA's thinking process here, they also are faced with a pair of choices. Laetrile might work and it might work, or it might not work, and we can make Laetrile legal or we can make Laetrile illegal. And so they put that up as a set of options here. Laetrile works, right, or Laetrile does not work. And the science will bear that out one way or the other. And then there's one other thing, and this is something that is under our control as the FDA. We can make Laetrile legal or we can make Laetrile illegal. All right, well, let's fill in each of these cells here. Suppose Laetrile works and we make it legal, right? What's the effect on us in the FDA? Well, not really any effect. We're not going to make any more money. We're not going to get raises in salary. We work behind the scenes, so we're not going to get any of the fame and glory. And so for us, there is, so to speak, no real effect on us. If, on the other hand, Laetrile turns out not to work and we make it legal, then in the long run, we are going to be exposed to a certain amount of shame. Because the fact that it didn't work and that we made it legal, we said it was okay, there's going to be a lot of blowback with respect to us. There might even possibly be lawsuits right down the road. for our not doing our job well and making legal a completely inefficacious drug. On the other hand, suppose we make Laetrile legal and it turns out that it works. Well, who's ever going to know, right? We've made it illegal. That means the drug manufacturers aren't going to invest any more in it. Nobody's going to try it. And so this is also going to be something that has no long-term effect. And then, of course, if we make Laetrile illegal and it turns out not to have worked as well, then that also means there's going to be no long-term effect. All right, so we step back and we analyze these results. Again, one of these cells is not like the other. These three have no effect on the FDA, but on the other hand, this cell here stands out as having an important negative incentive with respect to the FDA. If we approve things in this category, then we are exposing ourselves to a certain amount of negatives, both legal negatives and moral negatives. And so this is then more likely to loom larger in the thinking of the FDA, and it will give them an incentive to avoid things in that particular cell. And so what this means is that we have an institution that is incentivized to be risk averse. All right, so risk averse versus risk tolerance as a factor behind the decision making that is being made on both parties. Another issue worth highlighting is this issue of the political philosophy, which comes up in many business ethics cases in the 21st century now. But we have a competition between two conceptions of what it is to treat people morally. One side arguing that a moral way to care about people is, in some cases, to exercise paternal judgment over them. And so the government, as a benevolent agency, should exercise a certain amount of benevolent control. And the other side is arguing that the way we respect people is by leaving them free to live their lives as they judge best. And so a respectful government will treat people as self-responsible adults. And so the FDA is, in large part, a paternal agency, coming out of this position here. But there are two elements of paternalism that are built into the FDA's charter and mission. And so one element, I'll put it over here, has to do with the FDA's responsibility legally with respect to the safety of various pharmaceuticals. And so early in the 20th century, around 1906 or so, the FDA was charged with the responsibility of assessing the safety of pharmaceutical products before it would approve them to be on the market, so to speak. And for the first half century or so of the FDA's existence, that was primarily what its function was. In the 1960s, though, the FDA was granted more expansive powers, and it was then charged with assessing not only the safety of various drugs, but also the efficacy of drugs before it would allow them to be put on the market. And so what we then are saying is, from the FDA's perspective, it is our responsibility to decide for the citizens what safety criteria should be met, as opposed to the citizens having a responsibility to make their own judgments about what risks and how much safety in their lives they wish to have. And the issue of efficacy is the FDA asserting it's our responsibility to decide whether something works or not, and we decide on behalf of the citizens and allow them various products or don't allow them on grounds of efficacy, versus the position that says citizens in a free market sort out for themselves, what things work and what things don't work. Products that don't work get weeded out. Products that do work stay on the market, and that is how, in a free market, we decide efficacy. So what we have then is, in part, a debate over the degree to which moral respect for citizens involves respecting their individual rights versus respecting the government's paternal role in protecting them on those two grounds. So I want to explore those a little bit more. Let's take first the safety issue here. Medical issues are complicated, and one way of thinking about political principles involving complicated issues is to consider a range of cases in a variety of fields, some more complicated, some less complicated, but then also the diversity can help us sort out where we think the lines appropriately should be drawn. So in the case of safety issues, one thing that's worth thinking about here is various kinds of risky activities that human beings can engage in that we might be considering whether they should be banned, right, or not banned. So we can say, for example, skydiving is a relatively risky activity, right? Or we might say playing football is a relatively risky sport. So the number of injuries with respect to skydiving, the number of injuries with respect to football, skydiving is much riskier than all sorts of other leisure activities. Football among sports is much riskier. So should we consider banning these things, or should we say, well, yeah, they're risky, but it's up to individuals to decide whether they want to run those risks, right, or not? Now, suppose we get away from leisure activities and sporting activities. Suppose we think of some transportation examples. We can say, what about wearing a helmet when one is riding a motorcycle? I can remember being surprised when I moved to Illinois, because it was the first state where it was legal for people to ride motorcycles without a helmet. All the places I'd lived before had helmet laws. And so, yes, riding a motorcycle without a helmet is more risky. Riding with a helmet is more safe. Do we think it should be up to the individual to decide his or her own risk when riding a motorcycle, or do we think that people don't make good decisions on that risk factor, and so we should make it illegal, make it illegal to take rather certain risks and so forth? Same thing can hold if we turn to cars and seat belts. Right? It's riskier to drive a car without a seat belt on than it is with a seat belt. Do we leave that to individuals, right, or not? All right, those are transportation issues. These are sports and leisure activities. We can also consider food activities. We can say, for example, the consumption of alcohol in certain quantities, in certain types, and given individual predispositions, puts people in higher risk groups with respect to certain medical conditions. So do we leave that up to individuals, or should we ban alcohol on safety grounds? The same thing we might say for cigarettes, right, or various kinds of tobacco products, risks and so on. Do we leave it up to individuals, or do we make a decision and ban those? One other one I can recall living in New Jersey for a little while, and the state legislature made eggs over easy illegal, and that led to a very interesting and vocal debate among New Jerseyans. This was eggs over easy in restaurants, not in your own private home. But the state legislature had made the judgment that there's a higher risk of certain kinds of food poisoning if eggs were cooked over easy, and so they thought it was not an appropriate risk for citizens to take. The citizens, many of them who liked their eggs over easy, were protesting, and then various advocacy groups were arguing it was violations of people's liberty rights, and so that one ended up being repealed after a fairly short period of time. But the point just here is, in your own thinking about the paternalistic or non-paternalistic political principles that are being brought to bear with respect to this particular pharmaceutical, it's worth thinking through these particular cases and seeing how your thinking in principle is working it out. If you want to say all of these should be illegal and it should be a paternalistic government decision, or all of them should be legal and it should be left up to citizens, what principle is driving your decision making in that case? Or if you have a split decision, you think some of these things should be legal and some of these things should be illegal, well, what's the difference among those cases? Can you make a principled distinction between cases that you think should be legal and cases that you think should be illegal? And the point then being, considering a wide array of diverse examples in different degrees of severity helps you then make a decision on this particular dimension of this case as well. Okay, now when we turn to efficacy, we can do the same sort of thing. Consider a wide range of cases of things that work or don't work in a market and test our intuitions and principled thinking, hopefully coming out of thinking about our intuitions, about whether efficacy is something that should be left to the market to sort out or whether it should be a governmental decision as well. But it's worth highlighting, just to do things a little differently in this case here, the principle that's in case here. If we take the Laetrile argument, The official reason for banning Laetrile was not so much about safety concerns, although there were some, but primarily it was on grounds of inefficacy of the proposed product here. And so the argument was made as follows: it was said, if something does not work, then it should be made illegal. And in this case here, the judgment in particular was made: Laetrile does not work, and so therefore the conclusion is Laetrile should be banned, which is another way of saying made illegal. Okay. Now this judgment here, this second premise, is a medical expertise judgment, that's being made. So that's not the one of primary concern to us. But this one here is a political principle, It's put in hypothetical form. If something doesn't work, then it should be made illegal. And this is the one then that's worth thinking about, more broadly speaking, in terms of a whole number of examples. And so if we then consider examples outside of medicine, under what circumstances are we willing to apply that principle, or not? And so we can consider cases like, I don't know, fortune tellers might be a good one, You go to the fair and there are gypsy ladies, who have set up their tables and booths, and you go in and they tell you what your fortune, is going to be. Well, we could say that probably doesn't work, and so if we apply this principle, then we should have a government agency that bans fortune tellers. Or we can consider examples of newspapers. Most newspapers have still, in the 21st century, a daily publication of horoscopes. And in some cases, horoscopes, kind of a soft astrology, are used in an advice kind of way. This is what you should or shouldn't do in your life, given the alignment of various planetary objects and so forth. Well, does that work? No, it doesn't work. So there's no proof that horoscopes do work. There's lots of evidence against it. So if we apply this principle, does that then mean that we should override newspapers' rights to produce whatever they want and consumers to read in newspapers whatever they want and ban horoscopes? Another example I like to think about here is, it'd be in this case from a transportation thing. Sometimes I purchase gas, go into the gas station to pay for the gas, and they'll have a display of rabbit's foot keychains. And what it'll say is, buy a lucky rabbit's foot keychain. So, lucky rabbit's foot keychain. And here I can say, well, is that true? Is it true that if I buy this rabbit's foot keychain, put my keys on it and use it, that's going to bring me good luck? And again, I think most of us would be willing to say chances are good that it doesn't work. Actually, it's not even a rabbit's foot. There's explicit fraud in those cases. Most of the ones I've seen are just spun nylon or spun polyester with various colors and so forth. So we have fraud and it doesn't work, and so therefore this is something that should be banned from sale. Now, if in all of these cases here we say, look, yeah, those things don't work, but still they should be legal, well, what's the principle behind saying that they should be legal? Or we might say, no, this really is a good principle. We should get things that don't work off the market. The government has a responsibility to protect consumers from doing so, and so we should ban all these things on the grounds of fraud or at least inefficacy, and so forth. And so the point here for methodologically thinking through this difficult issue about the proper scope of FDA power with respect to the efficacy of pharmaceuticals, which is a complicated issue, think through a whole range of cases and add your own and try to make a judgment call about efficacy. Is efficacy something that can be sorted out according to individual judgment and the free market, or is efficacy an important issue that paternalistically the government should make decisions for us? All right, that's Laetrile in a nutshell.